Mrs. Clara is forcibly admitted after being accused of madness by her daughter-in-law and her own son. It all begins when she offers a cake and is humiliated in front of the family. At the clinic, she is sedated, isolated, and treated as a burden. But a forgotten secret awakens her son's conscience. And nothing will ever be the same again. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The afternoon sun illuminated the impeccable gardens of the Albright Mansion in Coral Gables, an affluent area of Miami, Florida. Maurice Albright, heir to the real estate empire founded by his late father, observed the city from his panoramic balcony. At 45, he commanded luxury developments spread across the country while sipping French champagne, imported especially for the party that would take place that night. The contemporary architectural mansion, with its 10,000 square feet, distributed over 3 floors, an infinity pool, and a view of the city skyline, was the perfect symbol of his success. There wasn't a single inch of that space that hadn't been planned by renowned decorators. Every work of art, every piece of Italian furniture, every detail screamed status and power. Still thinking about the Hamptons project, Deborah, his wife, cut through his thoughts with her sharp voice. She appeared on the balcony wearing a designer dress and jewelry that perfectly matched the house's decor. Impeccable, cold, and expensive. The investors confirmed their presence for tonight. "We need to impress them," Maurice replied, without diverting his gaze from the city. Deborah approached, adjusting her diamond necklace. "I hired the most in-demand chef of the moment. The buffet will be exclusive. The flowers came from Holland, Michigan this morning, and the guest list is impeccable. No new money types to embarrass everyone with rags to riches stories." She made air quotes with her fingers, with a disdainful smile. "Perfect," Maurice replied automatically. His life had been guided by that script for so long that he barely noticed how decisions simply flowed through him, without truly originating from him. On the upper floor of the mansion, far from the social areas and the gaze of frequent guests, Mrs. Clara was preparing a cornmeal cake in the small kitchen attached to her room. Maurice's mother, a 70-year-old lady, preserved in her simple gestures the memory of a life very different from the one her son now led. Born in the Appalachian Mountains, Mary Ann, Mrs. Clara as everyone called her, had raised her son alone after her husband's early passing. With hands now wrinkled by time, she had cooked, washed, ironed, and saved every penny to ensure Maurice studied in the best schools. The inheritance that transformed her son into a magnate only came when he was already in college. A distant, childless uncle had left properties that appreciated exponentially with the real estate boom. "You shouldn't be tiring yourself out," Joanna, the only employee Mrs. Clara truly talked to, entered the small room. "If Mrs. Deborah finds out you're cooking again—" "Joanna, my dear, I wasn't born to sit around looking at nothing. And today is my Maurice's birthday. He may not remember with all this business hustle, but a mother never forgets." Joanna smiled sadly. She knew, like all the staff in the house, that Mrs. Clara lived practically isolated in the north wing of the mansion. Deborah treated her like an inconvenient relic, a living reminder of her husband's humble origins that didn't fit the image she wanted to project. "The cornmeal cake with guava paste was his favorite when he was a child," Mrs. Clara continued, mixing the ingredients with affection. "When we didn't have money for presents, I would make this cake and light a candle. He would be so happy." Outside the door, without the two noticing, Deborah observed the scene with contempt. After a few seconds, she walked down the corridor with determined steps to the office, where her husband was reviewing documents. "Your mother is cooking again," she announced, not hiding her irritation. "I told you we hired people for that. She insists on acting as if she still lives in that tenement building." "My mother never lived in a tenement building, Deborah," Maurice corrected, without looking up from his papers. "It was a simple house, but decent." "Whatever. The point is, she doesn't understand our lifestyle. The staff ends up confusing hierarchies when they see her acting like one of them." Maurice finally looked up. "What do you want me to do?" "She's already confined to the North Wing, rarely participates in social events. I can't forbid her from cooking if it makes her happy." "I'm not talking about forbidding. I'm talking about appropriateness." Deborah walked around the room, touching expensive objects with her perfectly manicured fingertips. Have you thought about putting her in one of those senior living communities? Luxurious with activities people her age. We're not discussing this now. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. All right, but think about what I said. Tonight the Montgomerys will be here. The family patriarch controls half of the luxury hotels in the southeast. Imagine if your mother shows up talking about how she used to do laundry for others. The mention of the Montgomerys made Maurice tense. It was the biggest contract of his career, a high-end resort to be built in Key West, Florida, with an investment of $500 million. Everything needed to be perfect. I'll talk to her, he conceded finally. Meanwhile, in the backyard garden, away from the views of the main house, Richard meticulously cared for the rare orchids. Hired just 3 months ago as a gardener, he observed the dynamics of the mansion with attentive eyes. Son of farmers from upstate New York, he had studied botany and worked in the best gardens in the country before arriving there. Mr. Richard, Mrs. Clara's gentle voice surprised him. The lady approached with slow steps carrying a cup. I brought you some coffee. It's getting cold out here. Mrs. Clara, you didn't have to bother. He smiled, accepting the warm drink. He was one of the few on the property who treated the boss's mother with the respect she deserved. You work miracles with these plants. My father used to say that blessed hands make the earth flourish. Thank you. I learned from my parents. They had a small farm in Holland, Michigan. Holland, Michigan? What a coincidence. The flowers for tonight's party came from there, Mrs. Clara commented, looking at the house. My son's birthday is today. 45 years old. Time flies, doesn't it? Richard noticed the sadness in the lady's eyes. Did you do something special to celebrate with him? A cornmeal cake with guava paste. It was his favorite when he was a boy. She smiled nostalgically. But these social events are so sophisticated now. I don't know if there will be room for a simple homemade cake. The best flavors are those that remind us who we really are. Mrs. Clara. Before they could continue their conversation, Deborah's voice echoed from the outdoor intercom system. Richard, we need you to finish the front garden immediately. Guests will start arriving in a few hours. Excuse me, Mrs. Clara, duty calls, he apologized, returning the empty cup. As she walked back to the house, Mrs. Clara saw her daughter-in-law supervising the staff, setting up tables and decorations for the party. Their gazes crossed briefly. Deborah looked away first, pretending not to see her, and went back to giving orders to the staff with an authoritative voice. Deep in her heart, Mrs. Clara felt that something had profoundly changed in her son since his marriage to Deborah, as if each day he moved further away from the boy she had raised with so much love. But what could a mother do, except continue loving and hoping that one day he would find his true path again? Night fell over Miami as the first lights of the Albright mansion came on. Luxury cars began to arrive, parking at the circular entrance where uniformed valets awaited. Maurice, impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit, greeted guests alongside Deborah, who wore a stunning red dress and a smile as rehearsed as it was convincing. Richard! What a pleasure to have you here. Maurice effusively greeted the patriarch of the Montgomery family. This is my wife, Deborah. Richard Montgomery, a man of almost 70, with gray hair and an imposing stature, was accompanied by his son, Philip, and daughter-in-law, Christine. The family controlled a hotel empire in the southeast and were the main investors in the new resort Maurice planned to build. The pleasure is ours, Maurice. Your home is magnificent, exactly as we expected. Let's go to the main hall. The bar is serving the finest labels, and the chef has prepared exclusive appetizers. The event flowed perfectly. The orchestra played soft music, waiters circulated with silver trays, and conversations flowed between business, politics, and high society gossip. Deborah commanded everything with military precision, ensuring every detail was perfect. Upstairs, Mrs. Clara finished arranging her cornmeal cake. She had decided to go down just to give her son a quick hug and deliver her simple gift. In addition to the cake, she had knitted a scarf with special wool, something he could use on international trips to cold places. Are you sure, Mrs. Clara? Joanna asked, helping her get ready. The party downstairs is full of important people. It's my son's birthday, Joanna. A mother doesn't need a formal invitation to hug her son on the day he was born. She smiled, adjusting her simple blue dress, the best she had. I'll just greet him, give him my present, and come back. I won't even disturb the party." Meanwhile, in the main hall, Maurice was discussing the final details of the resort contract with Richard and Philip Montgomery. "Tomorrow, our lawyers will finalize the paperwork, but consider the deal closed." Richard smiled, raising his champagne glass. "Your project is exactly what we were looking for. Elegant, exclusive, and with appreciation potential." "You won't regret it," Maurice replied, feeling relief course through his body. $500 million secured. The biggest deal of his career. What are we celebrating? Deborah's voice emerged beside him. She smiled radiantly, holding her husband's arm as if it were a trophy. "We just sealed our partnership," Philip replied. "We just need to sign the papers tomorrow." "Wonderful. Then this night is doubly special. In addition to my husband's birthday, we celebrate the biggest deal in Albright Development's history." Deborah signaled to a waiter. "Bring the special champagne we reserved. We need a toast to match." It was at that exact moment that Mrs. Clara appeared in the hall. She carefully carried the cake in her hands, with the small candle lit. Some guests looked with curiosity, others with a certain disdain at the simple lady who completely contrasted with the sophisticated environment. "Maurice, my son," Mrs. Clara's voice was soft, almost timid. Deborah's smile froze instantly. Her eyes narrowed as she saw her mother-in-law approaching with that homemade cake that seemed more like an offense to all the refinement she had planned. "Mother? What are you doing here?" Maurice asked, visibly embarrassed. His eyes alternated between his mother and the Montgomerys, who observed the scene with neutral expressions. "Happy birthday, my son. I made your favorite cake like every year." There was a momentary silence. Deborah, sensing the growing discomfort, quickly took control of the situation. "What a lovely surprise, Mrs. Clara." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were pure ice. "Why don't we leave the cake in the kitchen? The chef prepared a special dessert for after dinner. It's just for a moment. I wanted my son to blow out the candle, as we always did," Mrs. Clara insisted gently, approaching closer. Richard Montgomery, to everyone's surprise, smiled genuinely. "What a charming tradition. Reminds me of my own mother. She always made me a homemade pudding." "No matter the occasion. See, Maurice, Mr. Montgomery appreciates our family traditions," Mrs. Clara said, brightening up. Cornered, Maurice gave an awkward smile and approached his mother. "Thank you, Mother. Let's do this quickly, okay?" Deborah observed everything with a plastic smile, but inside she was seething with rage. That simple woman, with her country traditions, threatened everything she had carefully built. The image of sophistication, the distancing from her husband's humble origins, all at risk because of a damned cornmeal cake. "Make a wish, son," Mrs. Clara said as Maurice leaned in to blow out the candle. At that moment, Deborah saw the perfect opportunity. With a quick and seemingly accidental movement, she tripped slightly forward, pushing Mrs. Clara's arm. The cake wobbled in the lady's hands, who tried to balance it, but ended up dropping it partially on the sleeve of Richard Montgomery's expensive suit jacket. "My God, what a disaster!" Deborah exclaimed theatrically. Richard looked at his yellow and red-stained jacket, while an awkward silence fell over the hall. All eyes converged on Mrs. Clara, who was mortified. "Mr. Montgomery." "I'm so sorry," she began, her voice trembling. Before Richard could respond, Deborah had already called 2 employees. "Bring damp towels immediately. Take Mrs. Clara upstairs. She's clearly not feeling well." "I'm perfectly fine," Mrs. Clara tried to protest, but Deborah interrupted her. "You're trembling, confused. We need to take care of you. Maurice, your extra jacket is in the closet. Lend it to Mr. Montgomery while we clean his." Maurice, torn between concern for his mother and panic over the potential business disaster, opted for pragmatism. "Mother, please let Joanna accompany you. I'll sort this out and come up to see you afterwards." Mrs. Clara, humiliated and confused, had no choice but to allow Joanna to guide her out of the hall under the gaze of all the guests. As they passed the door, her eyes met Richard, the gardener, who was discreetly observing the scene from the side corridor. There was understanding and solidarity in his gaze. Back in the hall, Deborah masterfully took control of the situation. "Richard, I sincerely apologize for this regrettable incident. My mother-in-law has been confused lately." "Age, you know how it is." Richard, who had already changed his jacket, surprised everyone with his response. No problem at all, my dear. Accidents happen. Your mother-in-law reminded me of my own mother. Simple, loving. They are people from another generation, another world. Deborah forced a sympathetic smile, but inside she was furious. Her plan to humiliate Mrs. Clara had only partially worked. She needed something more impactful. Dinner was served minutes later, a sequence of sophisticated dishes prepared by the star chef. Conversation flowed naturally, and the cake incident seemed forgotten, until Philip Montgomery, Richard's son, asked an innocent question that reignited the topic. "Maurice, has your mother always lived here with you?" Before Maurice could answer, Deborah intervened. "Yes, we insisted she stay with us, despite all our suggestions for places more suitable for someone with her." "Special needs." "Special needs?" Richard asked, frowning. "Just the natural challenges of age," Deborah replied with false concern. "Forgetfulness, confusion. We've already consulted specialists, but she refuses to follow medical recommendations." Maurice looked at his wife with an enigmatic expression. They had never discussed his mother's problems with doctors. Mrs. Clara had always been lucid and independent. However, that night's incident had shaken him. Could it be that he hadn't noticed signs of decline? The rest of dinner passed without incident, but the damage was done. On the faces of the Montgomerys, especially Christine, Richard's daughter-in-law, there was an expression of uncertainty. Business conversations gave way to banalities, and when the guests began to leave, the atmosphere was one of forced politeness. "Tomorrow at 10, in my office to sign the documents," Richard said as he left, but his tone no longer carried the same enthusiasm as before. When the last guest left, Maurice confronted Deborah. "What was that? Since when does my mother have problems?" "Don't be naive, Maurice," Deborah replied, removing her expensive jewelry. "Your mother ruined our night and possibly the biggest deal of your life. Don't you really see that she's not well? It was an accident, Deborah. You practically pushed her. I tripped. And if she had normal reflexes, none of this would have happened." Deborah raised her voice, indignant. "Frankly, I don't know how you don't see what's right in front of your eyes. Your mother needs special care, and this house is not the right place for it." Maurice ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "I'm going to see how she is." "Do that. But think about what I said. There are wonderful places where she would receive the attention she deserves. We could visit her always, and she would be among people her age with appropriate activities." In Mrs. Clara's room, the lady sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed in her party attire. Her face showed traces of tears, but she maintained the dignity that had always characterized her. "Mother," Maurice called softly, knocking on the half-open door. "My son," she tried to smile. "I'm sorry about what happened downstairs. It wasn't my intention to cause problems." Maurice felt a wave of guilt. He sat beside his mother and took her wrinkled hands in his. "I know, Mother. It was an accident. Your business, I hope it wasn't harmed." "Don't worry about that," he lied, trying to reassure her. Mr. Montgomery didn't even care about the incident. A heavy silence hung between them. Finally, Mrs. Clara spoke. "Your father would be proud of the man you've become, Maurice. But he would also say that no business is worth more than peace of mind." Maurice felt the weight of those words. For an instant, he clearly glimpsed the abyss between what he had become and what his parents had dreamed for him. It wasn't just wealth, it was integrity, simplicity, true values. "Sleep well, Mother," he said, kissing her forehead. "Tomorrow will be another day." As he left the room, he didn't notice that Deborah was observing the scene from the end of the corridor, her cold eyes calculating her next move. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Maurice woke earlier than usual. As the sun barely rose behind the Miami mountains, he was already in his office, reviewing the documents for the contract with the Montgomerys. His cell phone remained silent, no message from Richard or his lawyer confirming the meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock. Uncertainty gnawed at him from within. Deborah entered the room with a cup of coffee, her face perfectly made up despite the early hour. "Already working?" "You barely slept. I'm worried about the Montgomerys." Richard seemed distant when he said goodbye. Of course he was. "After the spectacle your mother put on." Deborah left the sentence hanging, placing the cup on the table. "Speaking of which, I made an appointment with Dr. Paul Miller for this afternoon." "The neurologist? For what?" "For your mother, obviously. Paul is the best specialist in dementia and Alzheimer's in Miami, and he's our friend. He'll be discreet." Maurice frowned. My mother doesn't have dementia, Deborah. It was just an accident. An accident that almost cost $500 million, she retorted, sitting on the edge of the table. Darling, I'm not doing this to upset you. I'm worried. You don't notice the signs because you see her with a son's eyes. The constant forgetfulness, the confusion, the inappropriate behaviors. What forgetfulness? What behaviors? Last week. She forgot we had changed the dining room decor. She went in there looking for a painting that hasn't been there for 3 months. The other day I found her talking to the plants in the garden as if they were people. Maurice tried to remember similar incidents, but his mind was hazy. It was true that he hadn't paid much attention to his mother's routine lately. And then there's that fixation with food. Always cooking, even when we have staff for it. It's as if she can't adapt to current reality. She's stuck in the past, Maurice. That's not healthy for anyone. Before he could respond, the phone rang. It was his assistant, informing him that Richard Montgomery had cancelled that morning's meeting without explanation. The contract was officially suspended until further notice. Maurice hung up the phone, feeling the blow like a punch to the stomach. They cancelled. Deborah sighed deeply as if she had expected it. $500 million, Maurice. I know it's hard to accept, but your mother needs professional help. For her and for us. Deborah's words echoed in his mind as he walked down the corridor to his mother's room. As he approached, he heard voices. The door was ajar, and he saw Mrs. Clara talking to Joanna while tidying clothes in a drawer. And then I told Connie that the new priest wasn't as good at sermons as the old one. Do you know what she told me? That I should be more patient, that he was new to the profession. Mrs. Clara laughed, carefully folding a blouse. And who is Connie, Mrs. Clara? Joanna asked, genuinely confused. Oh, my godmother from the Appalachian Mountains, you know. Mrs. Clara, you never told me about any Connie. And you haven't been to church in months. Maurice felt a chill. His mother really seemed to be confusing times and places. Maybe Deborah was right. Good morning, Mother, he said, entering the room. Mrs. Clara turned with a radiant smile. Maurice, my son, how was the meeting with the investors? Did everything go well? It hasn't happened yet, Mother, and it might not happen. He tried to soften the news, but saw her smile fade. Was it because of yesterday? Because of the cake? Her eyes filled with guilt. Don't worry about that now. He approached, holding her hands. Mother, do you feel well? Have you been forgetting things confused? Mrs. Clara frowned. Why do you ask that? I'm perfectly fine. Deborah told me you've been looking for things that no longer exist, talking to people who aren't here. That's absurd. I was just reminiscing with Joanna. And as for the painting, I thought it had been moved, not that it no longer existed. Joanna, sensing the tension, discreetly left the room. Maurice sat beside his mother. Anyway, we have an appointment with Dr. Paul Miller for this afternoon. He's an excellent neurologist, just for a routine checkup. Neurologist? Maurice, I don't need any doctor. I'm perfectly lucid. It's just a precaution, Mother. If everything is fine, great. But if there's any issue to be addressed, the sooner we start, the better. Reluctantly, Mrs. Clara agreed to the appointment. What she didn't know was that minutes before, while talking to Joanna, Deborah had instructed the employee to report any strange behavior from the lady and had deliberately distorted the story about Connie and the church, presenting it to Maurice as a confused episode, when in fact it was just a reminiscence. In the garden, Richard carefully pruned some rose bushes when he noticed Deborah approaching with a calculated smile. Good morning, Richard. Your work is impeccable, as always. Thank you, ma'am, he replied, cautious. In the few months he had worked there, Deborah had never addressed him directly, much less with praise. It must be difficult to care for such an extensive garden alone. I have help from Anthony twice a week. We manage. Still, it's admirable. She observed the roses for a moment. You know I'm worried about Mrs. Clara. Richard waited, showing no reaction. She's been confused lately. Advanced age, you know. Just this morning I found her here in the garden at 5 a.m., talking to the plants as if they were people. She said they were her old neighbors from the Appalachian Mountains. Richard knew it was a lie. He had arrived at 5:30 as every day, and the garden was empty. Moreover, Mrs. Clara had always been extremely lucid in their conversations. I didn't see her early this morning, ma'am, he replied, neutral. Perhaps she had already gone back inside. Anyway, if you see her acting strangely, please let me know immediately. "We're concerned about her health." "Of course, ma'am," he agreed, maintaining a professional expression. Satisfied, Deborah returned to the house. Richard remained still for a few moments, processing the strange interaction. Something didn't smell right about that story, and it wasn't the roses. At 3 in the afternoon, Dr. Paul Miller arrived at the mansion. He was a middle-aged man, elegant with Italian-framed glasses and a discreet Rolex on his wrist. A longtime friend of the couple, he frequented the same social circles and had already treated several influential acquaintances with utmost discretion. "Paul, so glad you could come." Deborah greeted him effusively. "The situation is becoming untenable. I came as soon as I received your message. Where is the patient?" "In her room. Maurice is with her. I'll take you there, but first—" She lowered her voice. "I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Yesterday she practically sabotaged a $500 million deal with erratic behavior. She's been having hallucinations, talking to people who don't exist." Paul nodded, understanding. "I will evaluate carefully. Trust me." In the room, Mrs. Clara was sitting in an armchair, visibly uncomfortable with the situation. Maurice, by her side, tried to reassure her. "Dr. Paul, this is my mother, Mary Ann." "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Clara. Your son and daughter-in-law are concerned about you. Can we talk a little?" "There's no need for that. I'm perfectly fine." "Mother, please," and Maurice pleaded. Reluctantly, Mrs. Clara allowed the doctor to examine her. First, simple questions. What day it was, who the president was, her address. Then memory and reasoning tests. She answered everything correctly, though with increasing irritation. "Now, Mrs. Clara," Paul said softly, "your daughter-in-law mentioned that you've been talking to people who aren't present. Can you tell me about that?" "That's absurd." "I was just telling Joanna old stories. I mentioned people from my past. And about looking for objects that no longer exist. I didn't know they had redecorated the house. How can I keep up with every change if no one consults me?" Paul made notes in his pad, his face unreadable. After a few more questions, he asked to speak with Maurice and Deborah privately. In the office, the doctor assumed a serious expression. "I cannot make a definitive diagnosis with just one consultation, but there are worrying signs." "What signs?" Maurice asked, anxious. "Irritability, denial, confabulation. She responds well to direct questions and basic tests, which is common in the initial stages of dementia. Patients develop impressive compensatory mechanisms." "So you think she's sick?" Deborah asked, feigning concern. "I believe we need more evaluations. I will prescribe some tests and a mild medication to start treating the symptoms of anxiety and confusion." Maurice looked devastated. "Is there no possibility of error?" "Yes, there always is, of course. But based on what I observed and what you reported to me, I believe we are facing a case of early cognitive decline. The good news is that, with proper treatment, we can significantly slow the progression." After the doctor left, Maurice remained silent, absorbing the preliminary diagnosis. Deborah, by his side, massaged his tense shoulders. "It'll be all right, darling. Now we have a specialist taking care of her. What if he's wrong? My mother has always been so strong, so lucid. That's exactly why it's hard to accept. But think about what's best for her. We want her to receive the best care, don't we?" The next day, while Maurice was in the office trying to salvage the contract with the Montgomerys, Deborah put the next phase of her plan into action. She entered Mrs. Clara's room when she was in the bath and looked for something significant. She found in a small carved wooden box a medal of Our Lady of Guadalupe, a family relic that had belonged to Mrs. Clara's mother and, before her, to her grandmother. Carefully, she took the medal to the kitchen and placed it inside a small bowl of water in the freezer. Then she returned to the room as if nothing had happened. Hours later, Mrs. Clara frantically searched for the medal. She rummaged through drawers, looked under furniture, asked all the staff if they had seen the object. "Are you sure you didn't put it somewhere else, Mrs. Clara?" Joanna asked, genuinely concerned. "I am absolutely sure. It always stays in the small wooden box that belonged to my mother. I never take it out except to clean it occasionally." Deborah, who was discreetly observing the scene, sent a message to Maurice. "Your mother is having another episode. The medal she says she lost was last seen in her hands last night." When Maurice arrived home, he found his mother still searching for the medal, now visibly distressed. "Mother, why don't you rest a little? Perhaps the medal will appear when you're not so anxious." You don't understand, son. That medal belonged to your grandmother, and to her mother before that. It's the most precious thing I own. I know, Mother. We'll find it, I promise. That night, during dinner, Deborah asked Joanna to serve a special dessert she had ordered, artisanal pistachio ice cream. When the employee opened the freezer, she found the small bowl with the frozen medal. "Ma'am, I found this in the freezer." Deborah feigned surprise. "What is this?" "My God, it looks like Mrs. Clara's medal." Maurice picked up the frozen bowl, incredulous. "How did this get here?" I don't know," Deborah replied with feigned perplexity. Then she lowered her voice. "Paul warned me about ritualistic behaviors in patients with early dementia. Sometimes they hide objects in strange places, following some internal logic that only makes sense to them." Maurice's face paled. He took the frozen medal to his mother, who was in her room. "Mother, we found your medal." Mrs. Clara looked at the object, still partially encased in ice. "In the freezer? How?" "I never—" "Don't worry, Mother. It's not your fault." He hugged her, feeling her tremble. "We'll take care of you, I promise." That night, Mrs. Clara couldn't sleep. She felt trapped in an incomprehensible nightmare. She knew deep in her heart that she would never put her mother's medal in the freezer. Something was very wrong in that house, but who would believe her now? Outside the mansion, sitting on a small bench in the backyard garden, Richard watched the lights in Mrs. Clara's room, the only ones still on at that hour. An uncomfortable feeling had pursued him since the strange conversation with Deborah. Something about the whole story didn't add up. A week after the frozen medal incident, the Albright mansion seemed colder and quieter than ever. Maurice spent more and more time in the office, buried in work to compensate for the disaster with the Montgomerys. The resort contract had been officially cancelled, and rumors about Albright Development's financial problems were already circulating in Miami's high business circles. Mrs. Clara rarely left her room. The daily doses of anxiety medication prescribed by Dr. Paul left her drowsy and confused, exactly as Deborah had planned. The medication, in fact, was much stronger than necessary for a supposed initial stage of dementia. That Saturday morning, Deborah entered her mother-in-law's room with a studiously gentle smile. She found her sitting in the armchair by the window, her gaze lost on the horizon. "Good morning." "Mrs. Clara, I brought your breakfast and your medicine." The lady turned slowly, her eyes without their former sparkle. "Where is Morris?" "I haven't seen him in days. He's been very busy trying to save the company after the incident." Deborah placed the tray on the table. "Take your medicine, please." Mrs. Clara looked at the pills with suspicion. "These medicines make me feel strange." "I can't think straight. They're for your own good." "Doctor's orders," Deborah insisted, her tone hardening slightly. "By the way, I have good news. We found a wonderful place for you. A therapeutic resort for special people like you." "Therapeutic resort. A beautiful place with gardens, activities, 24-hour medical care. Dr. Paul especially recommended it. He said it will be perfect for your treatment." Mrs. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't need any place. This is my home. I want to be near my son." "Darling, you've been a huge burden on Morris. He's devastated seeing your decline, blaming himself for not having noticed sooner. This is affecting his business, his health. I want to talk to my son." Mrs. Clara tried to get up but felt dizzy, an effect of the medication. "He'll come to say goodbye before we go." "I've already packed your bags, just the essentials. The resort has everything you need." Silent tears streamed down Mrs. Clara's wrinkled face. In her heart, a growing fear took shape. Deborah watched her with an almost palpable pleasure, barely disguised by a mask of concern. Meanwhile, in the mansion's office, Maurice was reviewing documents when his cell phone rang. It was Dr. Paul. "Maurice, I found the perfect place for your mother. The Sunstone Institute in Aspen, Colorado. A peaceful environment, top-notch staff, individualized treatment." "Sunstone Institute? I've never heard of it. It's discreet, serves only selected patients. Your mother will be in good hands, away from the stress of the big city, which only worsens conditions like hers." "I don't know, Paul. It seems rushed. Shouldn't we try outpatient treatment first?" "Your wife told me about the medal, Morris. These are worrying symptoms of ritualistic behavior. In my professional opinion, A few weeks of hospitalization for stabilization is the best approach. Deborah has already organized everything, including a visit this afternoon. Maurice hesitated. Although something inside him questioned the speed of events, the medical opinion and his wife's insistence made him doubt his own judgment. All right. We'll go see the place today. In the garden, Richard carefully watered the orchids when he overheard parts of the conversation between Joanna and another employee. They're taking Mrs. Clara today. Her bags are already packed. Where to? Some kind of clinic in Aspen, Colorado. Mrs. Deborah said it's temporary for treatment. Richard frowned. In recent days, he had observed Mrs. Clara's transformation from an active and lucid lady to someone lethargic and confused. The change was too drastic to be natural. Discreetly, he approached Mrs. Clara's room and gently knocked on the door. There was no answer. Taking a chance, he opened a crack and saw the lady sitting motionless, her gaze empty. "Mrs. Clara?" he called softly. She turned slowly. "Richard? Is that really you?" He entered and closed the door. "Yes, ma'am. I came to see how you are." "They're taking me away, Richard." Tears welled up in her eyes. "They say I'm sick, that I can't stay here anymore." "You don't seem sick to me, just different from before." "It's the medicine. They make me like this, confused. But when I say that, no one believes me." She held the gardener's hand with surprising strength. "My son needs to know the truth. Deborah is doing this. She wants to get rid of me." Richard felt a lump in his throat. His suspicions were confirmed. "I'll try to talk to him, Mrs. Clara, I promise. Be careful. She's dangerous." Mrs. Clara's voice was almost a whisper. They heard footsteps in the corridor, and Richard quickly exited through the balcony door, blending into the garden again. Seconds later, Deborah entered the room. "Talking to yourself again, Mrs. Clara? That's not a good sign." In the afternoon, a luxury car drove up the mountain road towards Aspen, Colorado. Maurice was driving, with Deborah beside him and Mrs. Clara in the back seat, silent and downcast. The scenery of the Atlantic forest flashed past the window, but no one appreciated its beauty. After almost 2 hours of travel, they arrived at a secluded property, surrounded by high walls with a discreet entrance gate. A golden plaque indicated the Sunstone Institute, Rehabilitation and Wellness Center. They were greeted by a middle-aged woman wearing an impeccably white uniform. "Welcome to the Sunstone Institute. I am Dr. Camilla Parker, Clinical Director. Dr. Paul told me about the case." "Thank you for having us, Doctor," Maurice greeted, still hesitant. "I'd like to show you our facilities. Patients stay in individual chalets. We have common areas, therapeutic gardens." The guided tour revealed a seemingly welcoming place. Everything clean, organized, professional. Smiling staff, seemingly well cared for patients. However, Maurice noticed that they only saw specific areas, as if it were a carefully rehearsed tour. Mrs. Clara remained silent throughout the visit, her eyes registering details that others didn't notice. Disguised bars on the windows, empty gazes from some patients, the forced rigidity of the staff's smiles. "And how long would my mother stay here?" Maurice finally asked. "Initially, we recommend a 30-day period for a complete evaluation and stabilization. Afterwards, we re-evaluate case by case," Dr. Camilla replied with a professional smile. "And can we visit?" "Of course, but for the first 15 days, we suggest avoiding contact so as not to interfere with adaptation. Afterwards, bi-weekly visits are welcome." Something in the clinical coldness of that explanation bothered Maurice, but before he could question it, Deborah intervened. "It seems perfect. And Dr. Paul has already checked all the credentials, hasn't he?" "Absolutely. We are a reference in specialized geriatric treatment." On the way back to the car, Maurice tried to talk to his mother. "What did you think of the place, Mother?" Mrs. Clara looked deeply into her son's eyes. "If you believe this is the best place for me, I trust you, my son." Those words, loaded with painful resignation, hit Maurice like a blow. For the first time since everything began, he felt real doubt about the diagnosis and the need for institutionalization. But looking at Deborah and remembering Dr. Paul's categorical opinion, his resolve wavered. "It's just temporary, Mother. For your own good." 3 days later, a discreet van from the Sunstone Institute parked in front of the Albright mansion. 2 uniformed employees entered to pick up Mrs. Clara and her small suitcase. Maurice had been conveniently called to an urgent business meeting that morning. Deborah's strategy: to avoid emotional scenes. "Don't worry, Mrs. Clara, Deborah smiled, accompanying her mother-in-law to the door. We'll visit you as soon as the doctors allow. Mrs. Clara stopped midway and turned, looking at the house she had shared with her son for the past few years. Despite the medications that dulled her senses, there was a sudden clarity in her eyes. Tell my son I love him no matter what, and that I'll be waiting for him, always. In the garden, Richard watched the scene, helpless. He had tried to talk to Maurice the day before, but had been prevented by Deborah, who had vaguely threatened him with dismissal if he kept meddling in family matters. Now, he watched Mrs. Clara's departure with a heavy heart and a silent resolve not to let that injustice go unanswered. When the van disappeared around the bend, Deborah returned inside the house with a smile she couldn't disguise. Finally, the mansion was completely hers. The Sunstone Institute that Maurice had visited was not exactly where Mrs. Clara was taken. What he had seen was only the facade, the presentable area of an institution that hid a much darker reality. After processing Mrs. Clara's admission at the elegant reception, the van proceeded to the back of the property, where the real facilities were located, a complex of old, damp and poorly maintained pavilions. Room 37, Pavilion C, an uninterested employee indicated, handing Mrs. Clara's small suitcase to a tired-looking attendant. This way, ma'am. The woman led her through dimly lit corridors to a tiny room, with 2 beds, peeling walls, and a single barred window that barely let in sunlight. Where are we? This isn't what they showed me, Mrs. Clara questioned. Confused. This is Pavilion C. The chalets are only for VIP patients, with a premium plan, the attendant replied mechanically, like someone repeating the same explanation multiple times a day. You'll be sharing the room with Mrs. Eleanor. Mealtimes are on the board. Medication will be administered 3 times a day. Before she could ask more questions, the door was closed, and Mrs. Clara found herself alone in the strange room. Mrs. Eleanor was apparently not present. She sat on the hard bed and felt tears stream freely down her face. Back at the Albright mansion, Deborah was already putting the next phase of her plan into action. On the same afternoon of Mrs. Clara's departure, she called a renowned decorator to transform her mother-in-law's room into a yoga and meditation studio. I want everything new. Walls, floor, lighting. Nothing that's here should remain, she instructed, as the professional took notes. And the personal belongings? The decorator asked, pointing to the few objects that still remained. Photo albums, some clothes, the carved wooden box. You can discard everything. Or donate, whatever. Joanna, who was passing by the corridor at that moment, heard the order and felt a pang in her chest. Discreetly, when Deborah and the decorator left to see other spaces, she entered the room and collected some of Mrs. Clara's most personal objects. The carved box, some old photos, a wooden rosary. She hid everything in her closet, in the maid's room. When Maurice arrived home at the end of that day, the transformation had already begun. Workers were removing furniture, and the walls were being prepared for painting. "What's happening here?" he asked, astonished. "We're renovating, darling," Deborah replied, hugging him by the waist. "I thought it best not to keep the room as it was. It would be painful for you to see everything stagnant, like a mausoleum. Your mother will be fine at the Institute, and when she returns, if she returns, we can adapt a new space for her." Maurice looked at the room being dismantled and felt a pang of remorse. It was as if they were erasing his mother's existence in the house as quickly as she had left. "Don't you think you're being hasty?" "I'm being practical, darling, and thinking of you." Deborah kissed his face. "By the way, I have a surprise. I made an appointment with Dr. Louise next week." "Dr. Louise?" "My gynecologist. We decided it was time to expand the family, remember? I'm going off birth control." The news caught Maurice by surprise. Although they had talked about children eventually, they had never set a concrete deadline. "I don't know if this is the ideal time with everything that's happening." "On the contrary, it's exactly what we need," Deborah insisted with a strange gleam in her eyes. "A new beginning, an heir to everything you've built, something to fill the void your mother left." The following weeks brought a new routine to the Albright mansion. Mrs. Clara's room was completely transformed. White walls, light wooden floor, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, aroma diffusers. Nothing remained that reminded of the former occupant. Deborah obsessively plunged into the mission of getting pregnant. She consulted fertility specialists, completely changed her diet, installed an app that monitored her cycle, and summoned Maurice at ideal moments for conception. Sex, once occasional and pleasurable, became a mechanical obligation governed by schedules and procedures. Maurice, in turn, sank deeper and deeper into work. The loss of the contract with the Montgomerys generated a wave of insecurity among other investors, and he needed to fight to keep the company afloat. Sleepless nights became frequent, as did the constant feeling that something important was being lost amidst that turbulence. At the Sunstone Institute, or rather, in the hidden wing where Mrs. Clara actually was, the days dragged on in a depressing routine, waking at 6 a.m. to the shrill sound of a bell, showering in communal showers with cold water, tasteless breakfast served on plastic trays, medication administered without explanation, endless hours sitting in a communal room where an old television displayed programs no one really watched. Her roommate, Mrs. Eleanor, was a lady over 80 who rarely spoke, only muttering to herself as she looked out the barred window. The staff treated the elderly like inconvenient objects, feeding, medicating and sanitizing them mechanically, without any trace of compassion. In the first few weeks, Mrs. Clara tried to argue, to explain that there had been a mistake, that she shouldn't be there. She was ignored or worse, more heavily medicated to control her agitation. She tried to use the reception phone, but was informed that patients could only make calls with medical authorization after case evaluation. Gradually, the oppressive environment began to affect her spirit. The combination of strong medications, isolation, poor nutrition, and lack of stimulation made her weaker and more confused each day. Sometimes, she truly forgot where she was or why she was there, ironically developing the symptoms that had been falsely attributed to her. But one thing remained crystal clear in her mind. Her son would come for her. Maurice would realize the mistake and take her home. It was only a matter of time. This certainty was the only thread that kept her connected to sanity in that desolate place. 3 months had passed since Mrs. Clara's institutionalization. The Albright mansion, despite all its luxury, seemed to have lost a vital essence. The gardens, though impeccably cared for by Richard, no longer displayed the same vigor. The meals prepared by renowned chefs no longer had the same flavor. The corridors, once occasionally filled with Mrs. Clara's soft humming, now echoed only the sound of expensive heels clacking on marble. Maurice noticed these subtle changes, but attributed them to the stress of recent months. After weeks of exhaustive negotiations, he had managed to recover some of the investors lost in the Montgomery fiasco, but at a high personal cost. His health visibly deteriorated, deep dark circles under his eyes, weight loss, a persistent cough that doctors attributed to anxiety. That Sunday afternoon, the mansion was exceptionally quiet. Deborah was attending a yoga and meditation retreat to increase fertility, leaving Maurice alone for the first time in a long time. Without meetings, phone calls, or his wife's controlling presence, he wandered through the rooms like a stranger in his own home. His steps led him, unconsciously, to his mother's old room, now transformed into Deborah's Zen studio. He stopped at the door, observing the unrecognizable space. Where before there was warmth and memories, now there was only decorative asepsis, white walls, bamboos in minimalist vases, expensive incense imported from Japan. "Mr. Maurice?" Joanna's voice surprised him. The employee was carrying clean towels for the bathrooms. "Hello, Joanna. The house feels strange when it's empty, doesn't it?" Joanna hesitated for a moment, as if measuring her words. "Yes, sir. It hasn't been the same since Mrs. Clara left." The direct mention of his mother, something that rarely happened now in the mansion, made Maurice turn completely to the employee. "Have you talked to her?" "The calls? No, sir. The Institute doesn't allow it. I tried a few times, but they say she's in intensive treatment and can't receive calls." Maurice frowned. "It's been 3 months. They said after 2 weeks we could visit." Mrs. Deborah mentioned that Dr. Paul recommended waiting longer, something about not interrupting the therapeutic process. A disquiet settled in Maurice's chest. It was true that Deborah managed everything related to his mother, passing on only filtered information about her condition. There was always an excuse to postpone visits. a new treatment that couldn't be interrupted, a delicate adaptation phase, medical recommendations for therapeutic isolation. I miss her. The words escaped before he could contain them. Joanna looked around, making sure they were truly alone. Mr. Maurice, there's something I need to show you. Intrigued, Maurice followed the employee to the domestic staff's quarters. In the small room Joanna occupied, she opened her closet and pulled out a cardboard box carefully hidden under some clothes. When Mrs. Deborah ordered everything to be discarded, I couldn't. I saved what I could. With trembling hands, Maurice opened the box. Inside were some of his mother's most precious belongings. The carved wooden box where she kept the medal, old photo albums, the rosary that had belonged to his grandmother, some letters yellowed by time. My God, Joanna, thought all this had been thrown away. I couldn't let that happen, sir. Mrs. Clara was always too good to me. Maurice sat on the edge of the simple bed, opening one of the albums. Photos of his childhood paraded before his eyes. Him and his mother on a picnic. His first day of school, modest but joyful birthdays. In every image, Mrs. Clara's unconditional love overflowed, immortalized on photographic paper. One particular photo caught his attention. Him at 12, holding a school trophy, and Mrs. Clara beside him, her face radiant with pride. He remembered that day. He had won a math competition, and she had worked extra hours doing laundry for others, just to buy him a special gift, a digital watch he had wanted for months. A tear rolled down Maurice's face, falling onto the photograph. How could he have forgotten all that? How could he have allowed the woman who had sacrificed everything for him to be so easily removed from his life? Sir, Joanna interrupted his thoughts. There's something else I need to tell you. I don't know if I should, but my conscience won't let me stay silent. Maurice looked up, discreetly wiping away the tear. What is it, Joanna? It's about Mrs. Clara, about how everything happened so quickly. Before the dinner with the investors, she was perfectly fine, lucid, active. Then suddenly everyone started treating her as if she was sick. Dr. Paul diagnosed, forgive me, sir, but Dr. Paul has been a close friend of your wife for much longer than you imagine. They've known each other since before your marriage. The revelation hit Maurice like a punch to the gut. How do you know this? I've worked here for 8 years, sir. I've seen many things. I've heard conversations. And on the day Mrs. Clara was taken away, I heard Mrs. Deborah on the phone with the doctor, laughing and saying they finally got her. Maurice stood up abruptly, his mind in a whirl. The pieces began to fall into place. The quick diagnosis, the rushed institutionalization, the immediate transformation of the room, the refusal to allow visits. I need to see my mother today. Sir, there's one more thing. The gardener, Richard, he tried to talk to you several times before the institutionalization. He said he had important information about Mrs. Deborah, but your wife stopped him. She threatened to fire him if he insisted. Maurice could hardly believe what he was hearing. Could he have been so blind that he had allowed his perception to be manipulated to the point of abandoning his own mother? Where is Richard now? He should be in the backyard garden. For it's Sunday, but he always comes to care for the orchids even on his days off. Minutes later, Maurice found the gardener exactly where Joanna had indicated. Richard was kneeling before a bed of rare orchids, so concentrated on his work that he didn't notice his boss approaching. Richard. The gardener looked up, surprised. It was rare to see Maurice in that part of the garden, especially alone. Mr. Albright, can I help you? Your Joanna told me you tried to talk to me before my mother's institutionalization. About what? Richard slowly stood up, wiping the dirt from his hands. His face revealed the internal conflict between the fear of losing his job and the need to speak the truth. About your wife, sir. About things I observed. What things? Mrs. Deborah. She manipulated situations to make Mrs. Clara seem confused or disturbed. I saw when she hid objects that your mother later looked for. I heard when she instructed employees to report strange behaviors that never happened. Maurice felt his blood run cold. How can you be sure of this? I've worked with plants for 20 years, sir. I've learned to observe subtle changes, to notice when something isn't growing naturally. Richard paused. And I did more than observe. I started recording. Recording? The gardener took a small device from his pocket, a digital recorder. Conversations I overheard. Moments I witnessed. I was waiting for the right moment to show you. but I never got direct access. There was always someone around. Maurice took the recorder with trembling hands. Why would you do that? You risked your job? My mother died alone in a nursing home, sir, abandoned by her family. I couldn't do anything for her at the time. I couldn't let that happen again to Mrs. Clara, who always treated me with respect and dignity. With a racing heart, Maurice pressed the play button. Deborah's voice filled the garden air. A few more weeks and she'll be completely sedated, unable to contest anything. The room is already being transformed. All evidence of her existence is being eliminated. As soon as she is officially declared incapacitated, we will have total control over everything. The recording continued, revealing sordid details of the plan, mentions of Dr. Paul as an accomplice, discussions about how to manipulate Maurice into accepting the situation. Every word was like a knife twisting in his chest. Where was this? He asked, his voice strangled. Right here in the garden. Mrs. Deborah was on the phone. She thought she was alone. I was pruning the rose bushes behind the greenhouse. And this? Maurice pointed to the recorder, still stunned. I've always carried it since I realized what was happening. To protect myself, too. I have more recordings stored in a safe place. Maurice staggered to a nearby bench and buried his face in his hands. How could he have been so naive? So easily manipulated? The person who had loved him most in the world, who had sacrificed everything for him, was now suffering somewhere distant, probably believing she had been abandoned by her own son. The Sunstone Institute, and he murmured, I need to go there today. Sir, there's something else I found out. I became suspicious of the name of this institute and researched it. The place you visited, with impeccable facilities and humanized treatment, is just the facade. In the back of the property there is a completely different structure, where less important patients are kept in precarious conditions. How do you know this? My cousin worked in maintenance there for a few months. He was fired when he questioned the practices of the place. He told me stories, terrible stories. A chill ran down Maurice's spine. The idea of his mother in such a place was unbearable. Richard, I need your help. I'm going to get my mother today, but I need evidence against Deborah and Dr. Paul. All the recordings, everything you have. Count on me, sir. And there's one more thing that might help. The medication. Mrs. Clara was taking much stronger drugs than would be necessary for any condition she might have. I saw the bottles in the trash once. I researched the names. They're practically sedatives, used for patients with severe psychiatric conditions. A wave of nausea hit Maurice. His own wife had drugged his mother deliberately to create the appearance of mental confusion. How could he have been so blind? I'll get my car. Meet me at the entrance in 15 minutes with all the evidence you have. As he walked quickly back to the house, Maurice remembered his mother's words the last time he saw her. If you believe this is the best place for me, I trust you, my son. The unwavering trust, even in the face of injustice. The love that never faltered even when betrayed. In his room, he opened the built-in safe and took out important documents, credit cards with no limit, and a significant amount of cash. He didn't know exactly what he would face at the Sunstone Institute, but he was prepared for any eventuality. When he passed through the kitchen on his way to the garage, he found Joanna. I'm going to get my mother. If Deborah calls, tell her I'm in an emergency business meeting. Yes, sir, good luck. Bring Mrs. Clara back to us. In the car, with Richard beside him, Maurice drove along the winding road to Aspen, Colorado, at well above the speed limit. The gardener had brought an envelope with all the collected evidence, recordings, photos, names of witnesses, including contacts of former employees of the Sunstone Institute who could confirm the real conditions of the place. Why didn't you ever suspect your wife before, sir? Richard asked after a long silence. Maurice reflected for a few moments. I think deep down I always suspected. But Deborah has a gift for manipulation. She infiltrates your mind, plants doubts, rewrites your memories. By the time you realize it, you no longer trust your own judgment. How did you meet her? And at a business event 5 years ago. She worked for a public relations agency that organized the event. She was magnetic from the first moment. She knew exactly what to say, how to act. In retrospect, I think I was just another target. Another one. Maurice cast a quick glance at Richard. I found out months after the wedding that she had been engaged to another businessman before. An older, also successful man. His family never liked her much. He passed away under questionable circumstances. A heavy silence filled the car. The implications of that information were too disturbing to be verbalized. When they finally arrived at the gates of the Sunstone Institute, it was already late afternoon. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the seemingly idyllic property. "Stay in the car, Richard. If I don't come back in an hour, there's an envelope in the glove compartment with instructions and contacts. A lawyer friend, the press, authorities. Are you sure you don't want company, sir? I don't want to risk your job any more than you already have. Besides, I need someone outside in case things get out of control." With determined steps, Morris walked to the Institute's reception. The same impeccably dressed woman who had received them months earlier smiled professionally. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "I've come to see my mother, Mary Ann Albright." The receptionist consulted the computer, her smile wavering slightly. "I don't see any visit scheduled for today, sir. I didn't schedule one, but I have the right to see my mother." "I understand, but we have protocols. Visits need to be scheduled 48 hours in advance, with approval from the medical team. Besides, it's already past the permitted visiting hours." Maurice leaned over the counter, his voice dangerously calm. "I don't think you understood. I'm not asking for permission. I'm informing you that I will see my mother today now, and if I am prevented, I will return in 30 minutes with the police and a court order." The threat took effect. The receptionist picked up the phone, speaking in a low voice to someone. After a few tense moments, Dr. Camilla emerged from a side door, her professional smile firmly in place. "Mr. Albright, what a pleasant surprise. If we had known about your visit. Where is my mother? Your mother is perfectly well, receiving the best care as we agreed. However, unscheduled visits can destabilize patients in intensive treatment. I want to see her. Now." The doctor hesitated, assessing the determination on Morris's face. Finally, she nodded. "Please accompany me. But I must warn you that Mrs. Mary Ann has been showing severe episodes of confusion. She may not recognize you or make delusional accusations." They crossed the same impeccable corridors Maurice had visited months earlier. But instead of heading to the area of individual chalets, the doctor led him down a different path, through a discreet door that led to a covered passage. As they advanced, the sophisticated decor gave way to a basic institutional structure, and then to an increasingly precarious environment. The smell of expensive cleaning products was replaced by an odor of mold and medicines. The walls, once adorned with contemporary art, now displayed only peeling paint. Maurice's heart pounded as he followed Dr. Camilla through the increasingly deteriorated corridors of the Sunstone Institute. The reality behind the luxurious facade was shocking. Elderly people in wheelchairs lined up in the corridors, some with lost gazes, others muttering to themselves. Apathetic staff who barely looked at the patients, an environment that resembled a penal institution more than a treatment center. "We've arrived at Pavilion C," the doctor announced, taking a bunch of keys from her pocket to open a heavy door. "Your mother is in room 37. I remind you that we have strict rules about the duration of visits." "Don't worry about that," Maurice replied coldly. Pavilion C was the worst of all. Damp corridors, poor lighting, an indescribable smell of cheap disinfectant and decay. Older or more debilitated patients were confined here, away from the eyes of visitors or inspections. Room 37. The doctor indicated a metal door with peeling paint. "I should warn you that your mother may be sedated. Part of the afternoon therapeutic protocol." Maurice felt a wave of almost uncontrollable fury, but remained composed. Every moment, every detail of that horrible place would later be used as evidence. "Open the door. And wait out here." The doctor hesitated, but something in Maurice's gaze made her recoil. She unlocked the door and stepped back a few paces. The room was tiny and suffocating. 2 narrow beds, damp walls, a single barred window that barely let in light. On one of the beds, an elderly lady slept deeply. On the other, a fragile figure sat looking out the window. "Mother?" Maurice called softly. Mrs. Clara turned slowly. Her face, once full of life, was pale and drawn. She had lost weight, and her eyes seemed sunken in their sockets. For an instant she showed no reaction, an effect of the heavy sedatives circulating in her system. Then, slowly, recognition shone in her eyes. "Maurice, is that really you, my son, or am I dreaming again?" He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her in his arms. He felt how thin she was, fragile, but still unmistakably his mother. "It's me, Mother. I came for you." "It's over." Silent tears streamed down Mrs. Clara's wrinkled face as she clung to her son like a shipwreck survivor to the last plank of salvation. "I knew you would come. I prayed every day. I knew you would discover the truth. Forgive me, Mother. Forgive me for allowing this. There's nothing to forgive, my son. You were deceived, just like me." Maurice helped her to her feet. Her legs were weak and he had to support her. "Let's go home now." "My thing," she pointed to a small bag in the corner of the room, all that remained of her belongings. We don't need anything from here." When they opened the door, Dr. Camilla was still waiting, now visibly nervous. "Mr. Albright, I understand your concern, but we cannot simply release patients without proper protocol. There are medications in progress, pending evaluations. The only protocol we will follow now is that of justice," Maurice replied, his voice sharp as steel. "Every minute my mother spent in this place will be investigated. Every improperly administered medication will be documented. Every person involved in this farce will be held legally accountable." Color drained from the doctor's face. "Sir, perhaps we should talk in my office. I'm sure we can reach an understanding." "The only understanding possible is that I am taking my mother now, and if any employee tries to prevent it, they will face the same legal consequences as you and your fraudulent institution." The determined tone and implicit threat took effect. No one tried to stop them as Maurice led Mrs. Clara through the corridors, back to the impeccable reception that masked the sordid reality of the back pavilions. When they finally stepped out into the open air, Mrs. Clara took a deep breath, as if savoring oxygen for the first time in months. The setting sun cast a golden glow on her tired face, but still she smiled. "The sky. I never thought it could be so beautiful." Richard waited anxiously in the car and immediately got out when he saw them. "Mrs. Clara." "Thank goodness." "Richard? You came too?" Tears of emotion sparkled in the lady's eyes. "Of course. We all missed you." Carefully they helped her into the back seat of the car. Maurice covered her with his jacket, noticing how she trembled despite the mild weather. "Mother, we need to stop at a hospital before we go home." "Hospital?" Fear crossed Mrs. Clara's face. "No more doctors, please. It's just to make sure everything is okay, to document how we found you, and to start clearing your system of the medications they improperly gave you. I promise I won't leave you alone for a second." She nodded, fully trusting her son. On the way to the nearest hospital, Maurice made several calls, to his lawyer, to the police, to a journalist friend. With each phone call, the plan to expose the Sunstone Institute and those responsible for that cruel scheme took more concrete shape. 2 hours later, at the Aspen Hospital, doctors confirmed what Maurice already suspected. Mrs. Clara was dehydrated, malnourished, and had been subjected to a cocktail of psychiatric medications absolutely unjustifiable for her condition. "It's criminal," the on-call doctor declared, indignant. "These dosages could cause permanent neurological damage in a person of this age, and with no condition to justify such treatment. I want everything documented, doctor. Every detail. We are already preparing a full report, and frankly, I suggest you contact the authorities. This is a police matter." They're already on their way. While Mrs. Clara received the first detoxification treatments, police officers arrived at the hospital to take statements and initiate a formal investigation. Maurice's journalist friend, editor of a major Miami newspaper, was already preparing a bombshell article about the case. When they finally left the hospital, it was already dawn. Mrs. Clara slept in the back seat, exhausted but safe, while Richard drove carefully back to Miami, Florida. "What will you do now, sir?" the gardener asked in a low voice so as not to wake the lady. "First, ensure my mother is safe and healthy. Then," Maurice took a deep breath, "confront Deborah. Are you sure it's wise to go back to the mansion? She might try something when she finds out. She won't be there. The yoga retreat lasts until Tuesday. We have time to prepare everything." Upon arriving at the mansion in the early hours of Monday morning, Joanna awaited them anxiously. Seeing Mrs. Clara being gently carried in Maurice's arms, the employee couldn't hold back her tears. "Mrs. Clara, finally." Let's prepare a room for her on the ground floor, Joanna. Later we'll reorganize her old room, but for now she needs immediate comfort. I've already prepared the main guest room, sir. Clean sheets, fresh towels, everything ready. Mrs. Clara woke briefly as they settled her. Are we home? Yes, Mother, and this time for good. A serene smile illuminated the lady's tired face before she fell back asleep. This time a natural and restorative sleep. Over the next 24 hours, the Albright mansion transformed into an operations center. Maurice's lawyer, Dr. Luke, arrived early to document everything and prepare the legal proceedings. Against the Sunstone Institute, against Dr. Paul Miller, and yes, against Deborah. The evidence is compelling, explained Dr. Luke. Reviewing the recordings and medical documents, we have grounds for lawsuits for fraud, elder abuse, improper administration of controlled medications, falsification of medical diagnosis, and possibly attempted embezzlement. I want them to pay for everything. Luke, every minute of my mother's suffering. And they will. But I must warn you, when your wife finds out, her reaction will be unpredictable. People like her, when cornered, can become extremely dangerous. The newspaper article was published the following morning, an explosive Tuesday for Miami. The headline read, "Scandal, Luxury Elderly Institute Hides Horror Pavilion." Mrs. Clara's story was told in detail, along with testimonies from former employees and families of other elderly individuals kept in similar conditions. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Maurice personally supervised Mrs. Clara's gradual return to normal life. Doctors had recommended rest and adequate nutrition to reverse the effects of the institutionalization. Slowly, as the medications in her system decreased, her lucidity and vitality began to return. On Wednesday morning, the sound of tires screeching at the mansion's entrance announced Deborah's tempestuous arrival. She burst through the front door like a hurricane, her face contorted in a mixture of fury and panic. "What is the meaning of this?" she screamed, brandishing the previous day's newspaper. "How dare you expose me this way? How—" Her words died in her throat when she saw Maurice calmly sitting in the living room next to a man she recognized as his lawyer. On the opposite sofa, to her complete horror, sat Mrs. Clara, pale, thinner, but undeniably present and alert. "Hello, Deborah." Maurice's voice was icy. "Welcome back." How—" she stammered, her face losing all color. "How is she here? How did I discover your lies? How do I know that you and Paul conspired everything from the beginning? I don't know what you're talking about. Clearly there was a terrible misunderstanding with the Institute, but I am also a victim. I believed the medical diagnosis, the professional recommendations—" "Spare us, Deborah," Maurice interrupted her, gesturing to the lawyer who placed a recorder on the table. "We have everything documented. Your conversations with Paul, your instructions to the staff, your detailed plan to get rid of my mother and assume total control." The recordings began to play, Deborah's unmistakable voice coldly discussing how she had sabotaged the cake at dinner with the Montgomerys, how she had hidden objects to make Mrs. Clara seem confused, how she had put the medal in the freezer to simulate irrational behavior. Deborah grew even paler, but quickly regained her composure. Her agile mind was already calculating exits, angles, counterattacks. Recordings can be edited, manipulated. That would never be accepted in court. Perhaps not in isolation, but combined with the testimonies of the household staff, with the medical reports proving improper medication, with the investigation already underway at the Sunstone Institute, the picture is quite clear. She changed tactics instantly, her eyes filling with rehearsed tears. "Maurice, you don't understand. I did this for us. Your mother was interfering with our life, with our chance to build a family. Business was suffering, you were torn. I just wanted to protect our future." "Our future?" Maurice laughed humorlessly. "Oh, your future, Deborah, because I discovered more interesting things in the last few days. Like the fact that your ex-fiancé, the one who conveniently passed away leaving you as the insurance beneficiary, also had an elderly mother who mysteriously ended up institutionalized in similar conditions." The shock on Deborah's face was genuine this time. She hadn't expected him to go so far in his investigations. "That's absurd. Defamation." "I'll sue you for this." Feel free. Your lawsuits can get in line behind ours. And the police are very interested in reopening your ex-fiancé's case. now that this interesting pattern of behavior has emerged. At that moment, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. Dr. Luke opened the door to 2 police officers and a district attorney, who entered with grim expressions. "Mrs. Deborah Albright?" The district attorney asked formally. "I am District Attorney Alexandra Mason, from the District Attorney's office. These are Detectives Smith and Stone. We have some questions about your involvement in the events related to Mary Ann Albright's institutionalization at the Sunstone Institute, and we would like you to accompany us to the police station." Deborah's face underwent an impressive metamorphosis, from shock to fury, from fury to cold calculation, and finally, to a mask of offended dignity. "This is an outrage. I am innocent of any accusation." "My lawyer—" "You can contact your lawyer from the police station, ma'am," Detective Smith replied professionally. "Please accompany us." As the police led Deborah out, she cast one last poisonous look at Maurice and Mrs. Clara. "You will regret this. It's not over." When the door closed, a heavy silence hung over the room. Finally, Mrs. Clara spoke, her voice weak but determined. "It's sad to see so much hatred in someone so young and privileged. What emptiness must exist within her to need to destroy others like that?" Maurice knelt before his mother, taking her wrinkled hands in his. "You have a heart I will never deserve, Mother. After everything she did, forgiveness is not for her, son. It's for ourselves, so we don't carry the weight of resentment." Mrs. Clara smiled gently. "Besides, Deborah's true punishment won't be prison or legal conviction. It will be living with the emptiness she herself created." In the following weeks, life at the Albright mansion completely transformed. Mrs. Clara's old room was restored, not exactly as it was before, but with a new balance, the simplicity and warmth she valued, combined with the comfort her son could provide. The Sunstone Institute scandal gained national proportions. Investigations revealed dozens of other elderly individuals kept in similar conditions, and the institution was closed by authorities. Dr. Paul Miller had his medical license revoked and faced multiple lawsuits. As for Deborah, after a brief detention, she was released to await trial. But the evidence against her accumulated. Her ex-fiancé's case was reopened, and in-depth investigations revealed a disturbing pattern of manipulative and possibly criminal behavior. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 3 months after Mrs. Clara's rescue, the Albright mansion received guests for the first time since the disaster with the Montgomerys. But this time it was not an event to impress investors or display status. In the garden, meticulously prepared by Richard, simple but elegant tables had been arranged under the trees. The smell of barbecue and homemade treats filled the air. Household staff, neighbors, true friends, all gathered in a celebration of life and gratitude. At the center of it all, Mrs. Clara smiled, recovered and radiant, surrounded by people who genuinely loved her. Her body still bore the marks of months of confinement, but her spirit had been reborn, stronger and wiser. Maurice observed the scene with a full heart. Business was slowly recovering. The scandal had initially affected the company's reputation, but the way he had faced everything, prioritizing justice and family above commercial interests, had earned him a new kind of respect in the market. Even more surprisingly, Richard Montgomery had recently re-established contact. Impressed by Maurice's integrity in exposing his own wife and facing the scandal to save his mother, the businessman was reconsidering the resort partnership. "In the end, it's values like these that I want associated with my business," Richard had said on the phone. "Not the perfect appearances your ex-wife valued so much." Richard discreetly approached Maurice, interrupting his thoughts. "Sir, everything is as Mrs. Clara requested. The cornmeal cake with guava paste is ready to be served." "Thank you, Richard, for everything." Maurice smiled, looking at the gardener who now held a position of trust in the family. "Without you, I just did what any decent person would do, sir." "No, you risked everything to save someone you barely knew. That is extraordinary." In the center of the garden, Mrs. Clara clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. When the chatter ceased, she spoke with a voice that, though not loud, carried a natural authority that made everyone listen. "Dear friends, thank you for being here today. We celebrate not only my return, but something much greater, the triumph of love over hatred, of truth over lies, of true family over appearances." She paused, her eyes meeting her son's in the crowd. My Maurice made mistakes, as we all do. He allowed himself to be led astray by values that were not the ones I planted in his heart. But when the time came for truth, he chose the right path. He risked everything, reputation, business, fortune, to do what was just. There is no greater treasure for a mother than to see her son's character shine in the most difficult moments. Silent tears streamed down Maurice's face as he listened to his mother's words. Beside him, Joanna smiled emotionally, and Richard maintained a proud gaze. "Some may think we lost a lot on this journey," Mrs. Clara continued. "The truth is we gained what truly matters. We found our essence again. And we discovered who our true friends are, our true family." She raised her glass of juice. "So let's toast, not to money, status, or appearances, but to love. The only good that the more you give, the more you have." Everyone raised their glasses and a chorus of voices repeated, "To love." As the sun began to set on the Miami horizon, casting a golden glow over the garden party, Maurice approached his mother and gently hugged her. "Thank you for never giving up on me, Mother. Even when I gave up on myself." "A mother's love never gives up, my son. Never," Mrs. Clara replied, her eyes shining with a wisdom that only life and suffering can teach. "Always remember, true wealth is not in what we possess, but in whom we love and how we love." Above them, the first stars began to dot the night sky, silent witnesses to a family that, after almost losing everything, had rediscovered the true meaning of home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Maurice and Mrs. Clara's story has touched your hearts. A mother's unconditional love is a force that can move mountains and illuminate even the darkest paths of life. If this narrative stirred emotions in you, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the deep bonds that unite us as human beings. Leave your like and share your feelings in the comments. Your experience and reflections enrich our community. And stay tuned. Each week we bring new emotional journeys that make us reflect on what truly matters in life. Until our next story.